I'd like to go back to a moment we were saying about money laundering for a minute, Archie. And what are some typical, traditional or typical, or for that matter, atypical means of money laundering through legitimate businesses? What would be like something a typical, oh, we can spot that a mile away, as opposed to something that's new on our radar? We hadn't tracked that yet.
And that's my favorite question. Phenomenal, because, you know, look, there's an organization that most Canadians didn't even know existed in Canada. It's called the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, the LTTE. Yeah. You know, and we have a large Tamil diaspora, probably the largest one, you know, in the world, sitting in the GTA, in Greater Toronto area, about 350 strong, since, gee, that data in my head is from 2009. So it must have, you know, they must have grown. And what was fascinating about the LTTE was, when I was looking at them as a particular terrorist finance sort of specimen, is they were absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. These, you know, what they did was we talk about trade-based money laundering, right? And I remember back in those days, you know, how unsophisticated we were. Just looking at trade-based money laundering, okay, this is something that we probably have to start to learn and grasp, so on and so forth. Well, what the LTTE did was they obviously had an economy, you know, in Sri Lanka. And as they moved their people out of Sri Lanka through the LTTE's own human trafficking system, globally, when they distributed the people, they also distributed components of their economies. And they threw them out to all the major countries, well, all the major cities in these countries. We're talking about London, talking about, you know, Toronto, talking about Switzerland, Geneva. Actually, no, their headquarters, they're more heavily, you know, centered in Bern, but they're in Paris, they're in Oslo. You get my drift here. And they operated their economy as if it was still a closed loop economy. They had grocery stores, they had, you know, they even had a bank. Well, actually more like a credit union in, you know, in I believe in Mississauga. And we're thinking, well, how do people send money? You know, we discovered this in 2010, or, you know, through one of the projects that I was working. But when you look at how they operated, they had their own tax, like I said, a closed loop system. You know, grocery stores, import export businesses. They had computer technology companies, everything that an economy a normal economy would have. And they operated in such a closed loop that there was actually a measurable gross domestic product, if you wanted to call it that. And more importantly, a taxation system by which they funded their war against the Sri Lankan government. And, you know, and all this was just going on, you know, right under my nose. In 2006, Stuart Bell, then working for the Globe and Mail, published, you know, in one of his publications, indicated that he estimated that the Tamil Tigers spent about $300 million a year to fight their war. Wow. Remember, these guys were building homemade submarines, yes, and torpedoes, and as we know now. But what was fascinating about that is because, like, look, we have this entire global architecture of what we call AML, CFT people, you know, certified money laundering specialists, and they just had no idea, none whatsoever.
That's, you know, there is a brilliance in that. There is a brilliance. It's a close knit. It's very much, you know, its own enclosed ecosystem, but for an economy. I mean, you have pretty much a micro system
Look, yeah, but
That's
not
real.
only that, Matthew. When you think of what they actually accomplished in terms of in terms of the amount of discipline that was required for this organization to maintain that. Today, their assets are still in Canada for what was here, and they're invested in real estate businesses, managed wealth, and and before I leave off on this one topic, I just wanted to say one thing. I uh, I was a team leader for Canada's landmark case in terrorist fundraising. Fellow by the name of Prapaharan Thambitharai, who we charged in 2008, convicted in 2010 of terrorist fundraising. It's the first time, and the first one in Canada. The previous years before that, I was part of the surveillance team on this fellow, and this is what I mean about one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, and it's just one definition. Mr. Thambitharai, I watched him, during surveillance, and I would see his children and how he treated them on a daily basis. He had this little princess of a little girl, just a wonderful father. And if he wasn't labeled so, I'd love to have that guy as as my friend.
Yeah. You alluded to something that I'm always reminded of, both in my academic and my personal life, with that kind of charisma, you might say, someone has. I'm reminded of something that George Orwell said when he was asked, I believe he was asked by a friend, says, why won't you take tea with this this gentleman? You're going to see him this week or tomorrow for interviews. That's why. He said, what do you mean? I may like him. In other words,
Absolutely.
there is an element where you may have to write something about someone, you may have to pursue someone, but you don't want to be mentally encroached by, like, wow, this person, I was really taken by. This person can't be this bad. I don't want to view it this way. But so there is that element. So yeah, I think that's the human layer of it all, really. The complexity of, as I've said many times in this podcast, my personal definition, especially when I write, is that the human, as much physically and how we conduct ourselves in the world, but the personality that we create is very spherical. As beings in the world, we're very spherical. We don't interchange our hats, put on different t-shirts, as it were. All the t-shirts are on, we're wearing all the hats at once, because all the roles we're playing all at once. We're a father, a son, a foe, a friend, and we're all these elements in different ways, different people at different times. So it's very fascinating.
But to continue on, I know that as part of you asked me what this typical trade-based money laundering or typical terrorist financing would look like. It takes on all sorts of different forms. Yeah. Here's an atypical example. This is from probably around 2011 or 2012. I came across this this particular investigation is actually a request that came from a foreign country, and it was about a Chechen goat herder. And what had happened was he had a Facebook page, and I'll have to see how to pronounce this again, but the Eid al-Fitr, like what we call Eid, right? That festival, the festival that ends Ramadan.
Right.
In the certain village of this country, it was customary, because part of their tradition, to those who can afford it to contribute a goat for the village,
right.
And what would happen is then, people that have left the village decades ago, but still try and keep in touch, they would, like I said, through social media, know that, hey, there's a fundraiser, and we can still contribute a goat to the village as part of the festival. Next thing you know is that Germany is charging this fellow with terrorist financing because of his involvement with ISIS. But in the meantime, there already had been, a number of Canadians from all over the country that actually contributed to the site.
Right.
And what did they all have in common? They all lived in that village once upon a time, or they grew up in that village once upon a time. So what they were doing, what was customary, what was traditional, they were trying to do the good thing. And here we have a guy that, that had connections with ISIS. And even then, it still comes down to needing to prove, well, did that money actually go to a goat being contributed to? Or did he buy arms or cell phone chargers or whatever for ISIS? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely,
This is a great, human element
Yeah.
to all this.
I can just imagine Archie walking into a meeting, a really serious meeting, and that being thrown on the desk, and everybody's like, "Is this a Friday the 13th kind of joke here? What's going on?"
That was the insanity of working national security sometimes, let me tell you.
Absolutely. And you know what? I got to thank you, Archie. I haven't said it yet, but thank you for your service to Canada and in your continued service to the
My
global
pleasure.
community.
My pleasure.